At Christmas dinner, my son reached for a candy cane. My mom smacked his hand and said, "Those are for the real grandkids." Everyone chuckled. I helped him with his jacket and we left quietly. A week later, my dad texted, "Loan payment tomorrow, right?" I replied, "Not from us." And then my phone exploded. My name is Rachel. And I need you to hear this because I still can't fully believe it happened. It was Christmas. The tree was glowing, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and ham, and my son Marcus, 7 years old, all gap-toothed and excited, reached up toward a candy cane hanging on the lowest branch of my mother's tree. One candy cane. My mother's hand came down so fast I almost didn't register what happened. He smacked his little fingers. Not hard enough to leave a mark. Just hard enough to make him freeze. And she looked at him, looked at my child, and said, cool as December air. "Those are for the real grandkids." The room went quiet for exactly 1 second. And then, people chuckled. My brother-in-law cleared his throat and reached for his eggnog. My sister Donna pretended she didn't hear. My aunt actually smiled into her napkin. And Marcus looked up at me. 7 years old. Cheeks flushed red. Not crying yet, but his little lip was doing that thing. You know that thing. Do you know what I did? I'll tell you. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a plate. I didn't say a single word to my mother. I walked to the hallway closet. I got Marcus's jacket. I zipped it up to his chin while he watched me with those big brown eyes, and I whispered, "We're going on an adventure." He nodded like he trusted me completely. We walked out the front door. I pulled it shut behind me. Gently. Like we were just stepping out for air. I want to stop right here for a second because I know what some of you are thinking. Why didn't you say something? Believe me, that question has lived rent-free in my head ever since. Maybe I was in shock. Maybe I'd spent 38 years learning how to go quiet in that house. Or maybe, and I think this is closer to the truth, I knew that if I opened my mouth in that moment, what came out would not be something Marcus needed to witness his mother say. So we left. We sat in the car in the driveway for a minute. Marcus asked if we could get McDonald's. I said yes. And I drove to McDonald's and I watched my son eat 6 nuggets and 3 packets of barbecue sauce, and I thought about what had just happened. The real grandkids. Marcus is adopted. We've never hidden it from him. It's who we are. Who he is. And I honestly believed, God help me, I believed, that my parents had made their peace with it years ago. We'd had the conversations. My dad had been at the courthouse when the adoption was finalized. He held Marcus when he was 4 and called him my grandson to anyone who would listen. But my mother had always been a different story. Little comments here and there. He doesn't look like you. Have you thought about what happens when he gets older and wants to find his real family? I always let it slide. Kept the peace. Told myself she was from a different generation. Told myself she'd come around. He came around all right. I drove home that Christmas night and put Marcus to bed, and he fell asleep before his head even hit the pillow. Full of nuggets, no idea his grandmother had just drawn a line in the sand. And I sat at the kitchen table in the dark and I made a very quiet, very calm decision. I was done making excuses for her. But here's where it gets interesting, because exactly 1 week later my father sent me a text. And that text changed everything. He wrote, "Loan payment tomorrow, right?" No. I need to back up and explain something because this part matters. My parents had come to us 8 months earlier in a bind. My dad's small landscaping business had hit a rough patch, and they needed help covering a balloon payment on some equipment. $4,200. My husband Derek and I had talked it over, agreed, and we'd given it to them as a loan. We'd even written it down. My dad had shaken Derek's hand. They were supposed to pay us back in 3 installments, and we'd been very, very patient. So when he texted me asking about the payment, 1 week after Christmas dinner, 1 week after my mother smacked my son's hand and called him not a real grandchild in front of the entire family, something in me just settled. Not anger exactly. More like clarity. I typed back 4 words. Not from us. And then my phone exploded. But that is a story for a little bit later, and I promise you it is worth the wait. Because what happened next wasn't just about money. It was about everything that had been quietly building for years. And some of it, I'll be honest with you, I'm not entirely proud of. I made a few choices in the weeks that followed that were, let's call them creative. And a couple that were just plain petty. But I was a woman with a plan and a wronged 7-year-old, and I don't fully apologize. What I can tell you right now is this. That quiet walk to the coat closet, that one gentle click of the front door, it turned out to be the loudest thing I ever did. So, 3 words. Not from us. I want you to picture me sitting at my kitchen table, coffee going cold beside me, watching my phone light up like a slot machine hitting jackpot. Except instead of winning anything, I was just watching my family reveal themselves one notification at a time. First it was my dad. 3 texts in a row, rapid fire. "Rachel, what does that mean?" "Rachel. Call me." Then my sister Donna. The same Donna who had smiled into her eggnog and said absolutely nothing at Christmas dinner. Suddenly she had plenty to say. Mom is really upset. Can you just call Dad and work this out? It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. I stared at that text for a solid 30 seconds. I typed and deleted 4 different responses. What I finally sent her was, I need a few days. Which was generous, honestly. Then came the one I wasn't expecting. My Aunt Paulette, my mother's older sister who lives out in Tucson and who I maybe call 3 times a year, she called me. Not texted. Told. And when I picked up mostly out of shock, she said before I could even say hello. Your mother told me what your father texted you. Good for you, baby. Actually laughed. Out loud. Alone in my kitchen. Aunt Paulette has never been one for drama, but she has also never once pretended my mother was easy. She said, I love my sister, but that woman has had a blind spot about Marcus since day one, and somebody needed to say something. I asked her if she knew what my mother had said at Christmas. Silence. Then, she told me he grabbed for a decoration and she redirected him. Redirected him. Do you see what I was dealing with? Aunt Paulette stayed on the phone with me for almost an hour that night. She didn't tell me what to do. She mostly just listened, which was more than anyone else in my family had managed to offer in about 7 years. And before she hung up, she said something I've thought about almost every day since. You leaving quietly was the most powerful thing you could have done. Don't you dare apologize for it. I wrote that down. I still have it on a sticky note inside my medicine cabinet. Now, Derek. I have to talk about Derek for a second because he is a whole subplot in this story and I adore him, and he also made me want to pull my hair out a little bit during this period. Derek is a peacemaker by nature. It's one of the things I love about him. It is also, in moments like this, deeply inconvenient. When I told him I texted my dad not from us, he got very quiet and then said carefully, Did you want to talk about that before you sent it? And I said just as carefully, No. He nodded. He made us both tea. And then, and this is why I married this man, he said, Okay. What do we do next? What do we do next? Well, here's where I'll admit that my first plan was not my most sophisticated. I was going to simply not respond to anyone for 2 weeks. A full communications blackout. Let them sit with it. In my head this was elegant and dignified. In practice I lasted about 4 days before my dad showed up at our front door on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus was at school. Derek was at work. It was just me, a half-folded basket of laundry, and my father standing on my porch in his work jacket with mud still on his boots. He looked older than I expected. Tired. He held his hat in his hands, which is something I've only seen him do a handful of times in my life, and each time it meant he was either very sorry or very scared. Sometimes both. I opened the door but not the storm door. There was still glass between us. Maybe that was petty. I'm asking you honestly, do you think that was petty? Because at the time it felt like the least I could offer. He said, I don't want to fight, Rach. I said, I'm not fighting, Dad. Then why the text? And here is the moment I had been rehearsing in my head since Christmas. I had planned something measured and articulate. I had practiced actual sentences. Instead what came out was very quiet and very simple. Because Marcus reached for a candy cane and Mom hit his hand and called him not a real grandchild and everyone laughed and none of you said a word. And then a week later you asked me for money. And I just couldn't. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Your mother didn't mean it the way it sounded. And there was 20 words that told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation was going to go. Not, I'm sorry. Not, that was wrong. Just, she didn't mean it the way it sounded. I nodded very slowly. I told him I loved him. And I closed the door. I stood in my hallway for a minute with my back against the door, heart pounding, laundry basket at my feet. And I thought, hey Rachel, you're going to have to be smarter about this. Because the loan isn't really the issue and the Christmas candy cane isn't really the issue. The issue is 20 years of everyone deciding that keeping the peace is more important than telling the truth. And I had just decided very quietly that I was no longer going to be the one holding that particular piece together. Here's what I started planning next. And I'll be honest with you, it started small. Almost too small. But it grew. And by the time it was fully formed, even I was surprised by myself. What I can tell you right now is that my mother had a very important birthday coming up in February. A big one. The kind the whole family was already buzzing about. And she had been planning on a party. A nice party. And up until Christmas dinner I had been the one organizing it. Had been. I think you see where this is going. And honestly, I'm not sorry about a single bit of it. So here's the thing nobody in my family knew. For 3 months, I had been quietly coordinating my mother's 70th birthday party. The venue deposit, paid on my card. The caterer, my contact. The guest list spreadsheet, sitting in my Google Drive. I had called her college roommate in Vermont to fly her in as a surprise. I had ordered a custom photo book from a printer in Nashville. I had done all of it. And on December 26th, the morning after Christmas while my coffee was still brewing, I canceled every single reservation. Calmly, politely, with a very reasonable cancellation email that said only that circumstances had changed. I got back about 60% of the deposits, which I put directly into Marcus's college savings account. That part I'm not even a little ashamed of. No. Did anyone know I'd done this yet? No. And that was the quietly brilliant part. Because the party wasn't until February and my family just assumed I was still handling everything. Donna texted me in early January asking if she should bring a dessert. I said, sure, that sounds great. Which technically was not a lie. Can I ask you something? Does this make me a villain? Because I've thought about it and I keep landing in the same place. I didn't blow anything up. I just stepped aside and let what was already unsteady fall on its own. Meanwhile, Marcus had been quieter than usual since Christmas. Not sad exactly. Just thinking. Kids do that. They process things slowly and then hit you with it at the most unexpected moment. His moment came on a random Wednesday night in January. We were making grilled cheese. He was standing on his little step stool at the counter and completely out of nowhere he said, "Mom, what's a real grandkid?" I put the spatula down. I turned off the burner. I sat down at his level and I explained as clearly and warmly as I knew how that he was real. That families are made in different ways and every single one of those ways counts. That sometimes grown-ups say things that are wrong and being wrong doesn't make it true. He listened very seriously. Then he said, "Was Grandma wrong?" "Yes, baby. She was." He nodded. Picked up his grilled cheese. "Okay. 7 years old. Just okay." I nearly fell apart right there at the kitchen table. Instead I texted Aunt Paulette under the table while Marcus ate, and she sent back a string of red heart emojis and one sentence. "That boy is going to be just fine because of you." I held on to that. Now February arrived. And so did the day my family finally realized there was no party. My sister Donna called me, voice pitched an octave higher than normal. "Rachel, the venue just told Mom they have no record of a booking under her name." I said. "That's strange." Pause. "Did something happen with the reservation?" "Circumstances changed," I said. Which was the truth. The silence on the other end of that call was genuinely one of the most satisfying silences of my adult life. I am not proud of enjoying it as much as I did. But here we are. What happened next, though, I did not see coming. My mother called me herself. Which she almost never does. She's a texter, always has been. But she called, and when I picked up she wasn't angry. She was crying. Not performance crying. Actually crying. She said, "I think I need to talk to you." And something in her voice made me say yes. "I want to be honest with you about something." When I heard my mother crying on the phone, my first instinct was not sympathy. It was suspicion. Because this woman had weaponized tears my entire life. A well-timed cry had gotten her out of more accountability than I could count. So I picked up, yes, but I picked up with my guard completely up. We agreed to meet at a diner near her house. Neutral ground. I told Derek where I was going. He handed me my coat and said, "Text me every 20 minutes or I'm showing up." Which made me smile for the first time in weeks. I got there first. Ordered coffee. Watched the door. She walked in looking smaller than I remembered. I don't know how to explain that except to say that my mother has always taken up a lot of room. In houses, in conversations, in my head. But that afternoon she walked in like someone who'd had the air let out of her a little. She sat down across from me and she didn't order anything. Just put her hands flat on the table. Then she said, "I've been thinking about what I said to Marcus." I waited. "I've been thinking about it since Christmas and I haven't slept right since." Now here's where I surprised myself. I didn't say good. I wanted to. Instead I said nothing and let her keep going. She talked for almost 20 minutes. Some of it was hard to hear. Some of it was the kind of honesty I had genuinely stopped expecting from her. She admitted that she had never fully, her word was processed, the adoption. That somewhere in a part of herself she was ashamed of, she had held Marcus slightly apart. Not because she didn't care about him, but because she'd had a picture in her head of what her grandchildren would look like and she'd never let go of that picture. "That's not his fault," she said. "That's mine." I looked at her across that diner table and I felt something complicated. Not forgiveness exactly. More like the first crack of light under a door that had been shut for a long time. I asked her one thing. Just one. "Does Dad know you feel this way?" She shook her head. "I don't talk to your father about things like this." Which honestly explained about 40% of my childhood. But that's a whole other story. I told her I wasn't ready to act like Christmas didn't happen. I told her that Marcus deserved a real apology, not to me, to him, and that it needed to come from her directly, in words he could understand without any of the family watching. Just her and him. She nodded. No argument. No negotiation. Then I said, and Mom, the party. I cancelled it. Another silence. Then, I figured. I'm sorry about the deposits. I'm not, she said quietly. I didn't deserve a party. I did not expect that. You want to know what I did? I laughed. Not meanly. Just, the absurdity of it hit me. This whole enormous thing. And there we were in a vinyl booth under fluorescent lighting, and my 70-year-old mother was telling me she didn't deserve her own birthday party. I said, you're going to get one anyway. A small one. But you have to earn it. She looked up. How? Marcus, I said. You start with Marcus. She called him the following Saturday morning. I set up the tablet at the kitchen table and gave them privacy, stood around the corner in the hallway, close enough to intervene, far enough to let it be theirs. I heard her voice, a little shaky. I heard Marcus say, it's okay Grandma, grown-ups make mistakes. 7 years old. I had to press my back against the wall and stare at the ceiling for a minute. But here's what I haven't told you yet. While all of this was unfolding with my mother, my father had gone completely silent. No texts. No calls. No showing up at my door with muddy boots. And that silence was starting to feel louder than anything else. Because I knew my dad. And a quiet Earl Montrose was never actually quiet. He was planning. What he did next, I promise you, I did not see coming. And neither, as it turned out, did my mother. My father is not a complicated man. He grew up in rural Virginia, speaks in short sentences, shows love by fixing things around your house without asking. He is not the type to sit down and have a feelings conversation. In 40 years I have seen him cry exactly twice. So when Donna called me on a Thursday night and said, Dad wants to have everyone over Saturday. Says he has something to say, I felt my stomach drop a little. Because Earl Montrose calling a family meeting meant something was either very wrong or very different. And I had no idea which one this was. I almost didn't go. Derek thought we should. Aunt Paulette, who I'd kept updated through this entire saga like my own personal one-woman advisory board, said, go. And bring Marcus. So we went. Dad had made chili, which, if you know my father, is his version of a white flag. The whole family was there. Donna, her husband Rick, my cousin Brenda, who'd driven up from Philadelphia without explanation, which told me Donna had been working the phones. Everyone was doing that thing where they talk too cheerfully about nothing because they're nervous. Marcus walked in and immediately asked if there was cornbread. There was. He considered this acceptable and sat down. My dad waited until everyone had food. Then he stood up at the head of the table, which he has done exactly never in my memory, and he cleared his throat. I owe some people in this room an apology, he said. And I'm not good at this, so I'm just going to say it plain. He looked at Marcus first. Marcus. I should have said something at Christmas when something unkind was said. I didn't. That was a failure on my part and I'm sorry. You're my grandson. Full stop. No asterisk. Marcus looked up from his cornbread. What's an asterisk? Rick actually snorted. The tension broke just enough. Dad almost smiled. It means no exceptions. You're it, kid. Then he looked at me. And Earl Montrose, man of approximately 40 words a week, said, Rachel, you have protected that boy his whole life and I made you feel like you had to protect him from us. That ends now. And the loan will figure it out. That's not why you're here. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. First time in recent memory. Derek put his hand over mine under the table. Here's what I found out later, and this is the part that genuinely floored me. Aunt Paulette had called my father. Not to lecture him. She told him one thing. Earl, you're about to lose your daughter over something you still have time to fix. That was it. That was all it took. Sometimes the right person saying the right thing at the right moment is the only domino that needs to fall. My mother didn't make a speech. That's not who she is. But after dinner she came and found me in the kitchen while I was wrapping up the leftover cornbread, and she stood next to me and said very quietly, I want to be better for him. I don't know if I'll always get it right. But I want to try. I handed her a piece of foil. We wrapped cornbread together in silence. And somehow that was enough. That was about 4 months ago now. Things are not magically perfect. I want to be straight with you about that because I don't believe in tidy endings. My mother still sometimes says things that make me take a slow breath. My dad still hasn't paid back the full loan, though he shows up and mows our lawn without being asked, which is very Earl. But last Sunday Marcus called my mother on his own. No prompting from me. Just picked up the tablet and called her to tell her about a book he was reading. I stood in the doorway and watched her face on that screen light up in a way I hadn't seen in years. And I thought, this is what we were working toward. Not a perfect family. Just an honest one. One that heard each other and said so and tried again. One candy cane. One quiet exit. 4 words in a text message. And somehow, on the other side of all of it, we found our way back to something real. Marcus is still the best person in this entire story, and he did absolutely nothing except be exactly who he is. I think we could all learn something from that kid. If this story stayed with you, drop something in the comments. I read every single one. If you've been through something like this with your own family, I really want to hear it because I know I'm not the only one. And if any part of this story hit different for you, good or bad, tell me that too. Your honesty means more than you know. If you like this, a like goes a long way. It tells me these stories are worth telling. And if something didn't land right, say that too. I can take it. Thank you for being here and for listening all the way to the end. It means everything.